Tout le monde, bienvenue pour ce Parlement, le 35e Parlement du Canada. Plus ça change. And it's reminding me of Harper already. So here we are, and we have had the speech from the throne, of course, with much pomp and ceremony. And I do think it was a brilliant stroke to invite His Majesty King Charles III to open our Parliament, to deliver the speech from the throne. And we are now beginning the debate on the speech from the throne. I have not yet had my opportunity to speak to it, and I want to share my initial thoughts about the speech from the throne. It would not be surprising if this was a speech from the throne from the Mulroney government or a different progressive conservative government. This strikes a very different tone from speeches from the throne after the last number of elections. There are less specifics, but it is quite true that the speech from the throne is a general direction. C'est clair que toujours le discours de trône, ce n'est pas un document, un discours avec beaucoup de détails. Ce n'est pas un budget, par exemple. But still, this is really vague. It makes it hard for me to know how I would vote on it. There's clearly not a lot in here to vote against. There's not a lot to vote for. Maintenant, le Manitoba est en feu, est en état d'urgence climatique, mais il n'y a presque rien dit au sujet du changement climatique, particulièrement au sujet d'urgence climatique. So here we are with a speech from the throne, which in contrast to the last numbers of them, from a different government, obviously, very little mention. There's the suggestion we will be fighting climate change. Here's the difficulty for Mr. Carney. He said he wants to do many things fast, and he'll have to do things faster than have ever been done before. Let's look at where we are. There's a reference, as I said, 2 times, a reference to we will fight climate change. So I would have been, I assume that Prime Minister Carney knows that we have a legal obligation to meet our Paris target. So this is, I repeat, a legal obligation of Canada. Nous sommes partis le cadre de le traité pour la Convention de changement climatique et nous avons accepté les cibles fixées, les règlements légaux. We are committed to 45 to 50% reductions below 2005 levels by 2035. We know that last fall, as at November 2024, the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development said we were not on track to meet our 2030 target. This 2035 target had not been adopted at that point, but we weren't on track to meet the target for 2030. As at November 2024, total reductions come to 7% below 2005. Encore, je veux répéter, maintenant, actuellement, nous avons seulement réduit les gaz à effet de serre par 7% contre l'année de référence 2005, seulement 7%. On doit gagner le niveau de cible fixé de 45 à 50% à l'année de référence de 2005 et la date limite sera 2030 et après 2035. So here we are with a new Prime Minister whose first action was to cancel the only climate measure that had accomplished any reductions at all. The reductions that were accomplished were, according to the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, far too weak to put us on track to meet our legal obligations. So I look forward, and I hope to hear from Prime Minister Carney how we are going to achieve our Paris commitments, which are legally binding. We are now at only 7% below 2005 levels, and the only, and I repeat, underscore, souligner, la seule mesure qui a accompli une seule réduction de gaz à effet de serre sera l'impôt sur carbone, qui s'est maintenant annulé. So the one measure that was doing anything, far too little, far too slowly, has now been canceled. and we are to do more and faster. I put it to the Prime Minister, how will that be done? I want to quote from someone that I regard as certainly someone who understands the climate crisis, or did when they wrote these words, from Mark Carney's book, Values, at page 273, quote, "The carbon budget to limit temperature rise to below catastrophic levels is rapidly being exhausted. If we had started in 2000, we could have hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius objective by halving emissions every 30 years. Now, we must have emissions every 10 years. If we wait another 4 years, the challenge will be to have emissions every year." Close quote. Now, let me repeat, those words were written in 2021, published in 2021. We are now 4 years later. It is 2025, which means that we must have our emissions every single year. Or it will be too late to avoid levels of catastrophic global warming. Again, to Premier Wildcanoe and everyone in Manitoba, I'm thinking of you. I am not using the forest fires of Manitoba for rhetorical flourish. We are in a climate emergency. We've seen fires ravage British Columbia. Every province in Canada had fires through the month of May 2023. It's already claimed lives in Manitoba this year. The climate crisis is a world on fire. Ask John Vaillant, author of Fire Weather. These fires create their own weather. They create their own winds. They drive faster and more furious flames, and firefighters can't put out a fire. You evacuate quickly. Ask the new minister in your cabinet, Prime Minister Carney. Ask Minister Rebecca Alty, who, when mayor of Yellowknife, had to order the evacuation of the entire city. Ask the people of Newfoundland and Labrador who dealt with Hurricane Hugo and whole homes being picked up and dumped into the sea at Port aux Basques. Ask the people of British Columbia, where we are still in 2025 repairing the roads that were wiped out by the atmospheric rivers that happened in the fall of 2021. Ask the families of the 619 British Columbians who died in the 4 days of the heat dome. The climate crisis is not a subject, it's not a file, it's not an issue, it's a current emergency. Maintenant, c'est clair que le discours de Trône, ce n'est pas occupé avec le sujet de changement climatique. Comme j'ai dit, c'est presque pas une seule mention de cette question, et encore comme une question d'urgence. I'm very concerned that what we're seeing here in the speech from the throne, which is not all the details, I will give Prime Minister Carney the benefit of the doubt that perhaps he's ready to bring into place measures that will achieve the necessary reductions in greenhouse gases to preserve human civilization, that he's prepared to do this while at the same time ensuring that Canada's economy is stronger. That can be done. I was unable to get a question through yesterday to Andrew Scheer, who gave a speech that was full of misinformation, talking about how the Energy East pipeline was cancelled by Trudeau instead of the reality. There was no market for dilbit in eastern Canada. There are no refineries east of Saskatchewan that can process bitumen. So there are a lot of non-starters and basically false narratives in this discussion. We also know that the East-West pipeline and the whole question Andrew Scheer was raising yesterday, that we shouldn't be importing oil from Saudi Arabia. The Green Party agrees. We shouldn't be importing any oil from any country. We should use Canadian oil as we decline in our dependence on fossil fuels till we use none at all. The only market for Saudi oil in all of Canada is the Irving refinery in St. John, New Brunswick, which cannot, underscore, cannot process bitumen. And the Irving industry has made it very clear they have no intention of building an upgrader to be able to process bitumen. So there are no refineries east of Saskatchewan that can process Alberta bitumen. The whole idea of an east-west pipeline to get Alberta oil to Canadian refineries is a lie. It does get it to tankers to go south to more American refineries, which is what the Trans Mountain Pipeline does. It brings dilbit to the Port of Vancouver, where it mostly moves south to the U.S. In any case, I await hearing from Prime Minister Carney how we square this circle. In this speech from the throne, he says they're going to create a major national project office and reduce approval times from 5 years to 2, all while respecting Indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent. I put it to you, Mr. Carney, you cannot engage respectfully on a nation-to-nation basis with First Nations where you've decided you want to build a project and you want to do it within 2 years. You've already violated free, prior, and informed consent. To be free and prior, you can't have already decided that's what you want to do. We need details, and we definitely need to know right now that this is not going to be a Harper-like Bill C-38, spring 2012, evisceration of environmental assessment law once again. So we have concerns on balance. As I said, there's very little to vote for in this speech from the throne. It's a lot of bold statements to which all Canadians will agree. We need to show economic sovereignty. We need to have a strong economy. We need to remove interprovincial trade barriers. But the weakness in this document is the lack of any serious commitment to avoid a climate crisis that destroys our economy and puts our children's future at risk. Merci.
Allez-vous voter contre le discours du trône?
Je pense qu'il n'y a pas, maintenant, actuellement, je pense que je vais voter en faveur, mais toujours, j'exige les détails. Comment c'est possible de faire les deux choses en même temps? We've got contradictory goals in the speech from the throne. We are going to be an energy superpower in both fossil fuels and renewables, and we're going to fight climate change. There's no reference in the speech from the throne to our legally binding commitments under the Paris Agreement. I know Prime Minister Carney understands these legally binding commitments because I've seen him at many of the conferences of the parties that have occurred that call countries to account for how we are doing in achieving our targets under the Paris Agreement. This is not new information for him, so I'm looking forward to him sharing the plan for how you accomplish these things. I know it can be done because the Green Party has put forward the plans for how we do it, but it is concerning that to the extent that there are any details here, they are more about how we push major projects, and from some of the Prime Minister's rhetoric, that might include things like pipelines or nuclear plants. We need to have study. We need to see that there is a case for such projects, a market for bitumen in the East Coast. Not seen one yet. Let's make sure that at least the arithmetic and the cost-benefit analysis is there before we drive through projects that actually endanger our future.
Have you had any conversations with other Liberal MPs or Minister de Bruzen about any of this to get any kind of indication? We're just all reading tea leaves?
No, I've spoken briefly with a number of members of Parliament in corridors and hallways, but I wouldn't say at this point we've had any substantive conversations, and I certainly haven't even had a hallway conversation about climate with Prime Minister Carney.
Sur la gestion de l'offre, est-ce que vous seriez d'accord que le projet de loi du Bloc est directement au Sénat par consentement unanime en Chambre, étant donné qu'il a déjà été étudié lors du dernier Parlement?
Oui, je pense que la gestion d'œufs, la gestion de produits agricoles, c'est bon pour notre économie, je suis d'accord avec ça. Et je pense que l'amendement du Bloc québécois, je pense que peut-être je vais voter en faveur, parce qu'aussi il a demandé et exigé que nous avons un budget avant le pause de l'été. Ce n'est pas, ce n'est pas un plein budget fiscal update. So, je pense que le Bloc québécois, l'amendement du Bloc québécois, ce n'est pas absolument au contraire du discours de Trump. Je pense que peut-être je vais voter en faveur de l'amendement du Bloc, mais pas pour l'amendement des conservateurs.
Juste pour la gestion de l'offre, pour être certaine, vous êtes d'accord qu'il y ait consentement unanime pour envoyer le projet de loi directement au Sénat sans passer par toutes les étapes à la Chambre?
Oui, je suis absolument d'accord. Oui, c'est seulement avec la gestion d'œufs ici. Again, it's only because of supply management of eggs in Canada that the prices of eggs have stayed within reach. The reason that in the United States eggs have become such a luxury item is that because the United States doesn't have supply management, the egg production sector allows millions of hens in a single barn. So when avian flu gets into a barn, they have to destroy millions of birds. Avec gestion d'œufs ici au Canada, nous avons les opérations très grandes avec les 1000 des poules, mais pas avec les millions de poules. C'est pour ça que le coût des œufs ici au Canada reste abordable. So I think we've got really now empirical evidence that we're very fortunate that we have had supply management on eggs. I never would have put together the risk. Actually, if it didn't happen in real life, I wouldn't have thought it was possible hypothetically that the risk of avian flu does more damage to your economy and makes eggs unaffordable in the United States, but not in Canada.
On wildfires, Ms. May, I was wondering if you had any information about any northern communities in British Columbia that are facing threats from wildfires right now?
We're always at threats. The Green Party plan, and I've mentioned it before, but I didn't reference a specific document. Mission Possible that we put out in 2019 pointed out we should cancel the F-35s and buy water bombers, that the real threat to our security wasn't in foreign military powers, but in the threat of the climate emergency. We are, as a country, there are F-35, there are water bombers that are built in Canada. They are de Havilland model water bombers. The manufacturers are way back ordered because there are so many orders for the de Havilland water bombers. They are capable of scooping up an enormous amount of water from local lakes and dropping it directly on fires. None of the backlog of orders for water bombers are for Canadian buyers. They are all for the European Union. So we asked, as I said, Green Party in 2019 said, let's stop buying Saudi oil, let's stop buying any oil from any foreign countries, let's reduce what we're producing and use everything we're producing for domestic use in Canada while we ramp down and end our dependency on fossil fuels on a scheduled basis. Here we are without enough water bombers. And as it turns out, the F-35s to be sold to us by our formerly reliable allies, do we really want to have military hardware where we have to go to the United States for spare parts? The world we're in right now requires much more self-reliance within Canada, requires much more self-sufficiency within Canada. We make water bombers here in Canada. Why are we not fully equipped with a national flying force of water bombers and a trained up national firefighting force? We've been calling for it for years, and these calls seem to fall on deaf ears.
Do you think part of the problem with Carney's sort of quiet on climate policy is that it's sort of fallen off voters' radars a little bit? It seems not to be as urgent an issue from what I'm hearing from other MPs.
Well, there's no question that the Trump factor took a lot of people's minds off other things. For a while, we thought that the only thing voters were going to want to talk about on the doorstep in the next election would be the cost of housing and how hard it is to find a family doctor. That's true. Those things are all top of mind. But when I talk to voters and I'm going door to door, it doesn't take long for them to say, and who's doing anything about the climate crisis? There's a level of anxiety just below the surface that's at a level of mental health concern, particularly for people who really study the science. How do you avoid despair when you look at where we really are and the risks to Canada and the biosphere if we continue to allow fossil fuel use and the burning of fossil fuels for energy to increase. So for instance, bitumen can be used for other things besides burning. I should mention that. Bitumen is a stock of usable carbon for a petrochemical industry that could be making durable plastics that make cars lighter, airplanes lighter, not against plastics. It's actually bitumen, when you think about it, is far too valuable to burn. But the only voice is, it's sort of I think of them as basically organized crime. The global fossil fuel lobby, the global fossil fuel industry is promoting burning fossil fuels more all the time in order for them to maximize profits while they still can. So it's a real fight. It's a race. It's a race between greed and survival. I'm still banking on survival. Thank you. Merci.